The MVP discussion this year has been a bit tiresome to say the very least. It really feels like the media echo chamber has been jamming the Jokic versus Embiid discussion down our throats just a little bit too hard. According to Basketball Reference, Jokic is the favorite. However, this year in particular feels very down to the wire. Jokic and Embiid are both incredibly talented and excel among centers, each in different ways. Both players are incredibly entertaining to boot. Jokic sees the floor like very few players can, and his modest usage rate demonstrates his incredible efficiency. Meanwhile, Embiid is an unstoppable powerhouse, and this has been one of his most durable years to date. With these two players' excellence and the ridiculous campaigning by the Sixers camp, it almost feels like the media ignores every other player completely when it comes to the MVP conversation. In these discussions, only Giannis has been considered another possible MVP candidate, and that's more or less happened very recently. I mean, Kendrick Perkins started bringing race into the discussion a few weeks ago, and that's really when you know the media have no more value to say. This is why we figured we'd briefly visit the Jokic versus Embiid topic, give our 2 cents, and then move on to some other players that in our opinion are entirely deserving of being mentioned in this year's MVP discussion. For Jokic versus Embiid, it really comes down to what you think the award should be about. The way we see it, MVP does stand for most valuable player, not the best player, or LeBron should have over 10 MVPs if we're being real. So if we're trying to see the value these players bring to their rosters, both have a ton. However, if you look at the supporting cast Jokic has compared to Embiid's, Jokic is clearly working with a lot less. The Nuggets' second best player is Jamal Murray, compared to Embiid's James Harden. We love Jamal, but there's really no comparison there. And if we look further than that, the Sixers also have a fairly stacked supporting cast around the two, with Maxey, Harris, Tucker, and Melton. While the Nuggets have some good players too, it's really tough to think that they wouldn't be at the very bottom of the league if they lost Jokic. Of all the players in the league, it's possible that Jokic makes the most of the pieces around him. Jokic has become unstoppable on ball, and he's never afraid to toss a dime to an open man instead of making a selfish play. Basically, while Embiid is by far one of the most valuable players in the league, Nikola Jokic is the Denver Nuggets. The man even runs their offense, which brings me to my next point. Talking about specific stats with these two is kind of useless after a certain point, as despite playing the same role, they have vastly different playstyles. Embiid is a league-wide premier scoring option in and around the post, while Jokic plays more of a hybrid point center role. Embiid is clearly the better scorer, and nobody is denying that. However, Jokic is legitimately one of the best passers in the league, not just among centers, and empowers everybody else on the team with near perfect passes, in addition to also being a very good post player when he needs to be. Either way, we really wouldn't be mad if either won MVP. However, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of other players totally deserving of discussion that just aren't getting the airtime.
The media has been filled with stories on the dominance we've seen from Embiid this year, or the consistent play from Jokic as he looks to become the 4th ever player in league history to three-peat the MVP award. But even though we're seeing all-time historic stats from both big men, there are a few other players this year who put forth amazing campaigns that aren't getting the attention it deserves. When it seems in any other season, this level of play would definitely be giving lots of MVP nods, with the most notable probably being Jason Tatum, who did actually get a lot of MVP buzz in the beginning of the season, but seems to have slowly died off as the year has been coming to a close, which would lead most casual fans to assume that Tatum must have hit a mid-season wall, but that's just not the case. We had made a video back in January about the era shift that's been happening in the league currently, and at that point, Tatum was looking like an MVP favorite, and as we said in the video, a major part of that was due to Tatum averaging more points on higher true shooting percentage than former Celtic Larry Bird had on any 3 of his MVP years. And it looks like this is going to hold true to the end of the season, while also being the only wing in league history to average 39 and 5. Numbers that not even MJ was putting up in his prime. And it's not as though injuries are the thing that's holding Tatum back from the award either, as out of the 2 frontrunners, Tatum has played the most games while also having a better record while being the first option in Boston. And when taking all of these things into consideration, it's hard to say there isn't a pretty solid case for Tatum winning MVP. But of course, you can't really have the MVP conversation without mentioning possibly the best player in the league currently, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's still doing Giannis things while averaging a career high in points with 31.1, really honing in and working on his offense, picking and getting to his spots with more efficiency, and not settling for those forced mid-range looks that he was last year. And despite the fact he's never really been the greatest three-point shooter by any stretch, which is probably why he's shooting a career low in three-point attempts, but despite the low attempts, he's not been a complete dud behind the arc this year. As believe it or not, he's actually knocked down 62% of his catch and shoot threes, which is up almost 20% from last year, showing a real improvement on shot selection. And with all of these improvements, it's really no surprise he's seeing a career high in scoring this year, being only 1.2 points per game behind the league leader Joel Embiid. And just like Tatum, Giannis also has a better record this season, as his Bucks currently lead the East despite the fact Chris Middleton has only suited up for a little over a third of the season, which honestly hasn't had a huge effect on the team, as he's been looking less like Chris Middleton and more like Chris Mid this season, as he's only averaging 15 points, the lowest since his 5th season in the league, while also regressing in rebounds and steals. Some of this slack has been picked up by Drew in the offense and Brooks on the defensive end, but Giannis being the best player on the best regular season team, I would say gives him still a pretty good case for MVP. There's been such a massive pool of talent that's been brought into the league over the past decade, with the crazy uptick in scoring making average players today look like all-stars in past eras. It's now gotten to the point where it seems there's at least a handful of players that would have been clear-cut MVPs in previous decades, now not even getting mentions. As when you take a player like James Harden, who's not even close to being a consideration for MVP, but is putting up more impressive stats than, let's say, 2006 Steve Nash. Even though we all know that Kobe was robbed of that award, I think this still shines a pretty good light on how elite this league has gotten. So whoever wins the award, all I can say is I definitely don't envy the voters, as this along with the All-NBA teams are sure to get fans fired up on Reddit and Twitter. But let us know in the comments who you got for your MVP lock. While you're down there, you might as well just slap a like on the video and hit the subscribe button. It would really mean a lot, and we'll see you next Monday.